The war was over. Everyone knew this. They had won just as they always won, just as they had won 100 times before across 2 centuries of conquest. Their ships hung in orbit above IV like metal insects waiting to feed. Their soldiers walked through the ruined cities with the slow confidence of predators who knew their prey had no teeth left. Commander Eth stood at the observation window of his command spire and watched the processing camps below. Long lines of defeated aliens shuffled through the gates, though with their 4 arms and skin, moved with their heads down. The tall and thin like walking sticks carried their young in silence. The pale and soft wept without sound because they had learned that sound brought punishment. Eth felt nothing but satisfaction. His body pulsed with soft blue light, the bioluminescent glow of his species shifting through patterns of pride and completion. They did not speak with mouths. They spoke with light, with colors that rippled across their smooth bodies. Right now, Eth's light said victory. 18 months. That was how long the system had resisted. 18 months of battles, of burning ships, of desperate last stands. The 7 species of this system had fought harder than most. They had created alliances. They had shared technology. They had even managed to destroy 3 warships, something that had not happened in decades. But in the end they fell. They always fell. The last resistance fleet had died 2 weeks ago in the debris fields around IV's largest moon. Eth had watched the final battle from this same window. He had seen the explosions bloom like flowers in the darkness. He had counted the dying ships one by one. When the last transmission cut to silence, he had filed his victory report and begun planning the occupation. Now the hard work of conquest was nearly complete. The population centers were under control. The weapons had been collected and destroyed. The leaders who might cause trouble had been identified and removed. In 6 months, the hegemony would send colonists. In a year, this system would be just another territory, its people broken and obedient, its resources flowing back to the. Eth turned away from the window and moved toward his command chair. His staff worked at their stations around the room, their bodies glowing with the dull orange of routine tasks. Reports came in every hour. Prisoner counts, resource assessments, construction schedules for the new military bases. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Then the sensor officer made a sound. It was not a word, just a sharp burst of yellow light that meant confusion and alarm. Eth turned to look at her. The officer's patterns were flickering rapidly, cycling through colors that did not make sense together. She stared at her screen as if it had started speaking to her in an unknown language. "Report," Eth commanded, his light shifting to the hard white of authority. "A ship," the officer said, her light still flickering. "A ship has just entered sensor range." Eth felt his patterns darken with annoyance. Probably a refugee vessel trying to flee the system. They had caught dozens of them in the past 2 weeks. Send a patrol to intercept. "Commander," the officer looked up at him. It came from the dead expanse. Eth went still. His light faded to almost nothing, the equivalent of shock. The dead expanse was a region of twisted space that surrounded this sector like a wall. It stretched for thousands of light years in every direction. No ship could pass through it. The radiation storms would cook any crew alive. The gravitational anomalies would tear any hull to pieces. They had sent hundreds of probes into the expanse over the centuries. Not one had ever returned. The dead expanse was why the system had remained undiscovered for so long. It was why the 7 species here had developed in isolation. And it was why, once conquered, they could never hope for rescue from the wider galaxy. Nothing came through the dead expanse. Nothing. "Show me," Eth ordered. The main screen flickered to life. Against the background of stars, Eth could see a small shape moving slowly toward the system. The computer highlighted it with targeting brackets and began scrolling data along the side. The ship was small, very small. It might hold 20 crew members at most, probably fewer. Its hull was covered in patches and repairs, layer upon layer of mismatched metal welded over old wounds. It moved with a slight wobble, as if its engines were not quite balanced. It looked like a piece of garbage that had somehow learned to fly. Eth studied the readouts. The ship's power signature was weak and unstable. Its weapons, if it had any, were primitive. Its shields were nearly non-existent. One patrol vessel could destroy it without effort. But it had come from the dead expanse. That was impossible, and Eth had learned long ago to be careful with impossible things. "Hail them," he ordered. The communications officer sent out a standard greeting on all common frequencies. For long moments there was only static. Then something changed in the signal. A voice came through, speaking in sounds rather than light. The voice was calm, tired. It spoke slowly, as if its owner had not talked to anyone in a very long time. The translation systems took a moment to process the unknown language, then began converting it to patterns they could understand. "This is Captain of the UNS Perseverance. I am looking for the war. I heard there was a war." The command center went silent. Every officer stopped working. Every light dimmed as they processed what they had just heard. Eth stared at the screen. The small ship continued its slow approach, wobbling slightly, held together by patches and stubbornness. "What species is the pilot?" he asked quietly. The sensor officer checked her readings twice before answering. "Unknown, Commander. There is no match in our databases. The ship design is also unknown. The language is unknown. Everything about this contact is unknown." Eth felt something he had not felt in many years. It was not fear exactly. The did not fear, but it was something close. A sense that the universe had just shifted in a direction he did not expect. The war was over. Everyone knew this. But looking at that battered little ship limping in from impossible space, Eth suddenly wondered if everyone was wrong. "Dispatch 3 patrol vessels," he commanded, his light returning to hard white. "Capture that ship. Bring me the pilot alive. I want to know everything about where it came from and what it wants." The orders went out. The patrol ships launched. And somewhere in the prisoner camps below, among the defeated and the broken and the hopeless, not one person yet knew that everything was about to change. The capture was easy. The small ship did not fight. It did not run. When the 3 patrol vessels surrounded it and ordered it to shut down its engines, it simply obeyed. The pilot even helped the boarding party by opening the airlock from inside. The soldiers who entered the ship reported what they found with confused flickers of light. The interior was a mess. Wires hung from open panels. Strange tools covered every surface. The walls were covered with marks and scratches, as if someone had been counting days for a very long time. And in the center of it all sat a creature unlike anything they had ever seen. She was small, smaller than almost any spacefaring species in records. Her body was soft, covered in thin fabric rather than armor or shell. Her skin was brown, darker than the but smoother than the. She had hair on her head, black and long, tied back in a messy bundle. She looked at the soldiers with eyes that held no fear. Then she smiled, showing white teeth, and raised her hands to show she carried no weapons. "Hello," she said. "I surrender. Please take me to whoever is in charge." They brought her to the command spire in restraints, heavy metal bands around her wrists and ankles, connected by chains. It was probably too much security for a creature so small, but the soldiers were unsettled in ways they could not explain. Something about her calmness, something about the way she looked at everything around her with quiet interest, as if she was studying them rather than the other way around. Eth waited in the interrogation chamber. He had arranged himself on a raised platform so he would tower over the prisoner. Around him, his best officers stood ready to observe and record. This was an important moment. A new species, appearing from impossible space. The hegemony would want to know everything. The soldiers brought the creature in and forced her to her knees. She went down without resistance, then looked up at Eth with those strange, calm eyes. "You are the leader here," she said. It was not a question. Eth's light pulsed with authority. "I am Commander Eth of the Hegemony. You have entered conquered territory. You will answer my questions." "Of course," the creature said. "That seems fair, you caught me." Eth studied her. According to the scans, she was made mostly of water. Her bones were calcium, easily broken. Her muscles were weak compared to almost any other species. She had no claws, no venom, no armor, no natural weapons of any kind. She was soft, fragile. How had such a creature ever reached the stars? "What is your name?" he began. "Captain." "What is your species?" "Human." She said the word carefully, as if it had been a long time since she had spoken it out loud. "I am a human being." "Where is your—" "Far away, very far, on the other side of the dead expanse." Eth's light flickered with disbelief. "Nothing survives the dead expanse." "I did," said simply. "How?" For the first time, something changed in her expression. Not fear, something else. Something tired and distant, like a person looking back at a long road they had already walked. "I flew through it," she said. "It took me 11 years." The chamber fell silent. Eth felt his officers pulsing with confusion and doubt around him. 11 years. The dead expanse was thousands of light years across. Even with the fastest ships, crossing it would take perhaps 2 years at full speed. And no ship could survive even 2 days inside those storms. "That is not possible," Eth said. "I know," shrugged, a small movement of her shoulders. "My ship's faster-than-light drive broke on the 2nd year. I had to rebuild it using parts I found floating in the wreckage of dead ships. Other explorers who tried to cross, I think. None of them made it very far." "You rebuilt a faster-than-light drive alone, without proper equipment." "I had tools, I had time, I had no other choice." She said this as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. When the choice is fix the drive or die, you learn to fix the drive. Eth ordered his medical officer forward. The officer approached with scanning equipment and spent several minutes studying her biology. When he finished, his light was pulsing with colors that made no sense. "Report," Eth demanded. "Her biology is unremarkable," the medical officer said slowly. "Weak cardiovascular system, fragile skeleton. She requires unconsciousness for approximately 1/3 of every day cycle to survive. She should be dead." "Explain." "Her brain chemistry shows extreme stress markers, compounds that indicate her body has been in crisis mode continuously for years. In any other species, these levels would cause organ failure. Her heart should have given out. Her mind should have broken." The medical officer looked at with something like wonder. "She has been dying slowly for 11 years, and yet she is here, talking to us." Listen to this with a small, tired smile. "Humans are stubborn," she said. "We do not die when we are supposed to. It is one of our better qualities." Eth considered this. A species that could survive what should kill them. A creature that crossed impossible space alone and arrived still sane enough to surrender peacefully. This was not what he had expected. "Where is your fleet?" he asked. "Your military forces?" "I do not have a fleet. I came alone." "Your species sent a single scout across the dead expanse." His expression shifted again. For a moment, Eth saw something in her eyes that he did not understand. Something deep and old and sad. "My species did not send me," she said. "I chose to come. I heard signals from this region years ago before I entered the expanse. Signals that sounded like war, like people in trouble, so I came to see if I could help." "You crossed the dead expanse alone, to help strangers you had never met." "Yes." Eth did not know what to say. In his entire life, in all the wars he had fought, he had never met a creature like this. The conquered because conquest brought power. Other species fought to survive or to protect their homes. But this Human had traveled for 11 years through the deadliest region of space, alone, just because she thought someone might need help. It was either the most noble thing he had ever heard or the most insane. Perhaps both. "The war is over," he said finally. "You arrived too late, we have already won." Looked at him steadily. Her tired smile did not fade. "Is that so?" she said. Something in her voice made Eth uncomfortable. It was not a threat. It was not defiance. It was something worse. It was the quiet confidence of a person who knew something he did not. "Take her to the prisoner camps," he ordered. "Maximum security. I want guards on her at all times." The soldiers pulled to her feet. She went without resistance, still wearing that strange small smile. As she reached the door, she looked back over her shoulder. "Commander," she said, "in my experience, wars are only over when everyone agrees they are over, and I have not agreed to anything yet." Then she was gone, and Eth was left alone with a feeling he could not name. He told himself it was nothing. She was one small, fragile creature. The war was over. The had won. He told himself this again and again over the following weeks. He never quite believed it. The prisoner camp was a place without hope. Everyone there knew this. They knew it when they lined up for their food rations, their 4 arms hanging limp at their sides. They knew it when they watched their young grow up behind metal fences. They knew it when they looked at the sky and saw ships instead of stars. Hope was dangerous. Hope got people killed. They had taught this lesson many times, and the prisoners had learned it well. Then the human arrived. Walked into the camp with chains on her wrists and guards at her back. She was smaller than anyone expected. The rumors had already spread. A new species. A creature from beyond the dead expanse. Some prisoners thought she would be a monster. Others thought she would be a god. She was neither. She was just a tired woman with calm eyes and dirty clothes, and when the guards pushed her into the general population area, she fell in the mud like anyone else. The prisoners watched her from a distance. No one approached. Getting close to new arrivals was risky. New arrivals sometimes worked for the new arrivals sometimes brought punishment just by existing. Picked herself up, wiped the mud from her face, and looked around. Then she walked straight toward a group of who were sitting against a wall, and she sat down next to them. "Hello," she said. "My name is, will you teach me your language?" They stared at her. They did not understand her words, but they understood the gesture. This small creature was not afraid of them, was not avoiding them, was asking for something. One of the older, a female named, made a decision. She pointed to herself and said her name slowly, repeated it, then pointed to other things and said their names, the ground, the wall, the sky. Repeated every word. She got some of them wrong at first, but she kept trying until she got them right. This went on for hours. Then it happened again the next day and the next. Within 2 weeks could speak broken. Within a month she was learning. Within 6 weeks she understood enough to have simple conversations. The prisoners did not know what to make of her. She was weak, yes. She needed more sleep than anyone else. She got sick easily and had to be careful about what she ate, but she never complained. She never gave up, and she kept asking questions. Strange questions. Where do the guards store their weapons at night? Which sections of the fence are watched and which are not? How do the supply ships enter the atmosphere? At first, the prisoners refused to answer. These were dangerous questions. If they learned they were sharing such information, everyone would suffer. But did not push. She simply nodded and changed the subject, and then, slowly, she began to share things of her own. She told them about Earth, about a small blue planet where billions of humans lived and died and built and destroyed. She told them about human history, about the ice ages that had nearly killed her species before they learned to make fire, about the diseases that had wiped out millions before they learned medicine, about the wars that had burned entire nations before they learned to make peace. "Humans almost destroyed ourselves many times," she said one night. sitting in a circle with and who had gathered to listen. We are not a smart species. We are not a strong species, but we have one quality that has kept us alive. What quality? Asked. Stubbornness, said. When something tries to kill us, we refuse to die. When something tries to break us, we refuse to break. It is not logical, it is not always wise, but it is who we are. She paused and looked around the circle at the defeated faces watching her. They think they have won, she said quietly. They think you are broken, but I have seen your people. I have watched the mothers protect their children. I have watched the elders teach the young ones about the old days. I have watched them sing their quiet songs when the guards are not listening. She leaned forward. You are not broken. You are waiting. And I am here to tell you that waiting is not the same as losing. After that night, things began to change. Small things at first. Prisoners who had avoided each other started talking. Old conflicts between species were set aside. Information began to flow. Learned everything. She learned which guards could be bribed and which could not. She learned the patrol schedules. She learned where they kept their emergency equipment. She learned about the neural compliance collars that they used on troublemakers, and she learned about the old trade signals that they had never bothered to study. And she began to plan. The first act of sabotage happened 3 months after her arrival. A supply convoy lost half its cargo when the storage containers mysteriously developed leaks. They investigated but found nothing. It was blamed on poor maintenance. The second act happened a week later. A guard patrol found their weapons corroded, eaten away by some kind of acid. The prisoners shrugged and looked innocent. No one could explain where the acid had come from. What no one told them was that had spent weeks teaching them how to make simple chemicals from food waste and cleaning supplies. More incidents followed. Communication towers failed, security doors jammed, power systems flickered. Each event was small. Each event could be explained as accident or bad luck, but together they formed a pattern. The occupation was beginning to fray. Came to one night with fear in her eyes. They are getting suspicious, she said. They are increasing patrols. They are talking about collective punishment. We need to stop before they discover us. Shook her head. We cannot stop. If we stop now, nothing changes. Your children grow up as slaves, you grow up as slaves, forever. But they are too strong, they have warships, they have weapons we cannot match. Yes, agreed. They have all those things, but they have a weakness too. What weakness? Smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had spent 11 years alone in the dark and had come out the other side with something hard inside her. They believe the war is over, she said. They believe you are beaten. They are not watching for an enemy because they think there are no enemies left, and that belief is a weakness we can use. She put her hand on his arm. I am not going to lie to you. This will be hard. Some of us will die. Maybe many of us will die. But I crossed the dead expanse for 11 years because I believed I could help, and I will not stop believing now. Looked at this strange little creature, this soft and fragile human who should have been dead 10 times over. She thought about her children. She thought about the future they would have under rule. Then she made her choice. Tell me what you need, she said. Smile widened, and for the first time it looked like hope. I need engineers, she said. I need pilots. I need anyone who remembers how to fight. Because there are dead ships floating in the debris fields around the moon, and I know how to bring them back to life. The real work began that night. And far above, in his command spire, Commander Eth had no idea that his victory was already starting to slip away. 6 months. That was how long it took for Commander Eth to realize something was very wrong. At first, the problem seemed unconnected. A supply ship lost contact and never arrived. A patrol vessel reported strange signals near the debris fields, then found nothing when it investigated. Guard stations experienced equipment failures at random times. Food stores spoiled. Fuel tanks leaked. Communication systems developed strange echoes. Each problem was small. Each problem had an explanation, but the problems kept happening and they kept getting worse. Eth stood in his command center and studied the reports. His light pulsed with angry red, the color of frustration. Around him, his officers worked at their stations with nervous energy. They could feel his mood. They knew better than to disturb him without good reason. "The prisoner work details," Eth said suddenly. "Show me the productivity numbers." An officer pulled up the data. The numbers looked normal. The prisoners were meeting their quotas. They were following orders. They were behaving exactly as defeated populations were supposed to behave. And yet, Eth felt something wrong in those numbers. The prisoners were too quiet, too obedient. Conquered peoples usually showed some resistance in the early months, small acts of defiance that had to be punished. But the prisoners in this camp were perfect, too perfect. "The human," Eth said, "where is she?" Another officer checked the surveillance feeds. "In the general population area, Commander, she has been behaving normally. No violations, no incidents." "Show me." The screen changed to show the prisoner camp. Eth watched as the view moved through different sections until it found. She was sitting with a group of, apparently doing nothing. Just sitting, talking occasionally in that primitive mouth language her species used. But as Eth watched, he noticed something. Other prisoners kept walking past that group. They would pause for just a moment, exchange a few words, then move on. Nothing obvious, nothing that looked suspicious. But it happened again and again, a constant stream of brief contacts. "Increase surveillance on the human," Eth ordered, "and begin random inspections of the prisoner barracks. I want to know what they are hiding." The inspections found nothing. Of course they found nothing. Had spent months preparing for exactly this possibility. The real plans were never written down. The real supplies were never stored in obvious places. The communication network used old trade signals that hummed at frequencies the equipment was not designed to detect. But the inspections made the nervous, and nervous conquerors make mistakes. The first real crack appeared when a prisoner was caught trying to sneak past the inner fence. The guards brought him to the interrogation center and demanded answers. What was he doing? Where was he going? Who was he working with? The said nothing. The guards used pain, the screamed but still said nothing. They used more pain, hours of it, and still they kept silent. This was unusual. Conquered peoples usually broke under interrogation. They had no reason to protect each other. They had no hope of rescue. Suffering for others made no sense when suffering could be avoided with simple cooperation. But this would not talk, and when the guards finally gave up, they found that the other prisoners were looking at them differently, not with fear, with something else, something that looked almost like pride. Eth ordered an example to be made. He chose 10 prisoners at random and had them executed publicly. This was standard procedure. Collective punishment reminded everyone of the cost of resistance. But instead of fear, Eth saw something strange in the faces of the watching crowd. They looked at the dying prisoners with grief, yes, but also with determination, as if the deaths meant something, as if the deaths proved something. That night, 3 guard stations lost power simultaneously. When the backup systems came online, the guards found that someone had stolen weapons from the armory. Not many weapons, just a few pulse rifles and some ammunition. But the theft was impossible. The armory had been locked. The guards had been watching. And yet the weapons were gone. Eth felt the cold touch of genuine worry for the first time. He sent a message to the hegemony requesting reinforcements. Something was happening on IV that he did not understand, and he wanted more ships in orbit before it got worse. The reinforcements arrived 2 weeks later. A full battle fleet, 20 warships strong, commanded by High Admiral herself. She was not happy about being pulled away from more important duties. She made this clear when she met with Eth in his command center. You requested military support to control a prison camp. Her light pulsed with contempt. A single prison camp. What kind of commander needs a fleet to manage slaves? Something is wrong here, Eth said. The prisoners are organizing, they have stolen weapons, they have disabled security systems, and the human. The human. Slight shifted to something like amusement. The small creature that crossed the dead expanse. I read your reports, very dramatic, but she is one person. What can one person do against the hegemony? At that exact moment, the first explosion shook the command spire. Alarms filled the air. Officers shouted in flashing lights. The main screen came alive with emergency reports from across the system. What is happening? Demanded. Eth stared at the screen in disbelief. The debris fields around the moon were lighting up. Ships were rising from the wreckage. Dead ships. Ships that had been destroyed in the original battle. Ships that should have been nothing but scrap metal and frozen corpses. 17 ships. 17 impossible ships, patched together from wreckage and powered by engines that should not work. They were ugly. They were clumsy. Some of them were barely holding together. But they were armed, and they were attacking. Hal's light was flickering with confusion. Those ships were destroyed. We confirmed every kill. In the prison camp below, the uprising began. Thousands of prisoners suddenly moved at once, overwhelming guard stations, seizing control points, and opening the gates. The neural compliance collars, which should have stopped any organized action, failed completely. Someone had jammed them using harmonic frequencies. Someone had spent months figuring out exactly how to make them useless. And at the center of it all, walking calmly through the chaos with a stolen pulse rifle in her hands, was. She did not look like a conqueror. She did not look like a hero. She looked like what she was, a tired woman who had been planning this moment for 6 months and was finally seeing it happen. The ships said, running up beside her, "They are flying, your plan worked." Our plan, corrected. We did this together. Engineers, pilots, navigators, your people rebuilt those ships. Your people are flying them now. Above them, the sky lit up with weapons fire as the Resurrection Fleet engaged the battle had begun. Eth watched from his command spire as his victory crumbled. His occupation forces were under attack from the ground. His fleet was under attack from ships that should not exist. And somewhere in the chaos was a small, fragile human who had spent 11 years crossing impossible space just to do this. "Target the prison camp," he ordered. "Orbital bombardment, kill them all." "Commander, we have personnel on the ground." "Kill them all." But the bombardment never came. The Resurrection Fleet, as poorly equipped as it was, had positioned itself directly between the warships and the planet. To fire on the surface, they would have to destroy those ships first. And those ships were not dying as easily as they should. They fought in ways they had never seen. They used tactics that made no sense. Ships that appeared to be disabled would suddenly come back to life and strike from unexpected angles. Feints that looked like desperate last attacks turned into coordinated ambushes. The Resurrection Fleet was outmatched and should have been destroyed within hours. But they refused to lose. Had taught them well. "This is impossible," said, watching the battle unfold. "They cannot win, they have nothing." "They have her," Eth replied quietly. "They have the human." The battle raged on. And for the first time in 200 years, they began to wonder if they had made a terrible mistake. The second battle of IV lasted 9 days. On the first day, they were confident. They had 20 warships against 17 patched-together wrecks. They had trained crews against desperate volunteers. They had centuries of military experience against a ragged collection of former prisoners. By the third day, that confidence was gone. The Resurrection Fleet fought like nothing they had ever seen. Ships that took critical damage would retreat behind moons or into debris fields, patch themselves together with whatever they could find, and return to battle hours later. Crews that should have surrendered kept fighting until their life support failed. Pilots who ran out of ammunition would ram their ships into engines, then bail out in escape pods and wait to be picked up by friendly vessels. High Admiral watched the battle from her flagship and felt a cold fear growing inside her. She had fought many wars. She had crushed many rebellions, but she had never faced enemies like this. "They are insane," her tactical officer said, his light flickering with something close to panic. "They do not behave like a military force. They behave like they have nothing to lose." "They have nothing to lose," replied grimly. "That is the problem." On the surface, the story was the same. The freed prisoners had seized control of most of the planet. Ground forces found themselves surrounded, cut off, and fighting against enemies who appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. Every building became a fortress. Every street became a trap. Moved through it all like a ghost. She did not lead from the front. She was too valuable for that, and she knew it. Instead, she appeared wherever she was needed most, offering advice, solving problems, reminding people why they were fighting. "I am tired," a soldier told her on the 5th day. He had been fighting without rest for almost 100 hours. His 4 arms were shaking with exhaustion. "I do not know how much longer I can continue." Sat down beside him. She was tired too. Dark circles under her eyes, hands that trembled when she was not paying attention, but her voice was steady. She said, "there was a war, a very long time ago. My ancestors were losing. They had almost nothing left. Their enemies had more soldiers, more weapons, more everything. Everyone said they should surrender." "What happened?" "They refused," smiled. "They kept fighting, not because they knew they would win, but because giving up would mean their children would grow up in chains, and that was not something they could accept." They looked at her. "Did they win?" "Yes, it took years. Many of them died, but yes, they won." Put her hand on his arm. "You are fighting for the same thing, for your children, for everyone who comes after you. They want you to believe that you cannot win, but believing is a choice, and you get to make that choice yourself." There was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up his weapon and stood. "I will rest when the war is over," he said. Nodded. "So will I." On the 7th day did something unexpected. She broadcast a message on all frequencies, not to the resistance, not to her own people. To the Commander Eth and High Admiral both heard it. So did every soldier on the planet and in the fleet. So did the resistance forces, who stopped fighting for just a moment to listen. "This is Captain," the message began. Her voice was calm and clear, the voice of someone who had thought carefully about what she wanted to say. "I am speaking to the hegemony. You are wondering why this is happening. You have conquered many worlds. You have crushed many rebellions. You have won every war for 200 years. And now, for the first time, you are losing. You want to understand why. I will tell you. You thought the war was over because you won the battles. You destroyed the fleet. You captured the population. You established control. By every measure you use, you had achieved complete victory. But you did not understand what you were really fighting. You were not fighting ships. You were not fighting soldiers. You were fighting will. The will of people who had decided that freedom was worth dying for. The will of people who looked at their children and chose to fight rather than let those children grow up as slaves. That will does not die when you destroy a fleet. It does not die when you conquer a planet. It does not die when you put people in chains. It sleeps. It waits. And when the time is right, it wakes up again. I came here alone, one small human in one small ship. I had no weapons. I had no army. I had only the belief that people who want to be free will always find a way. And I was right. You can keep fighting. You can call for more ships. You can try to burn this planet down to dead rock, but it will not change anything, because now the people of this system know something they had forgotten. They know they can fight back. They know they can hurt you, and they will never forget that knowledge. The war is not over. The war will never be over, not until you leave. Paused. So leave while you still can. The message ended. For a long moment, no one on either side moved. The battle hung suspended, as if the universe itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Then the flagship turned and began to retreat. Had heard enough. She was a practical commander. She had won many battles, but she had never won a battle against an enemy who truly did not care whether they lived or died. She had never won a battle against belief. All ships, she ordered, her light dull with something that might have been shame. Withdraw from the system. We are leaving. Eth, still on the surface, received the order with disbelief. We cannot leave. We have invested too much. The hegemony will. The hegemony will understand, interrupted. Eventually. This system is poison. The longer we stay, the more we lose. And what we are losing is more than ships and soldiers. We are losing the belief that we cannot be beaten. She was right, both of them knew it. On the 9th day, the last ship left the system. The occupation was over. On the surface, the celebrations lasted for weeks. People who had been strangers became friends. People who had been enemies became allies. The 7 species of the system, who had spent centuries fighting each other before the came, now stood together as something new. And through it all, moved quietly, accepting thanks she did not want and praise she did not feel she deserved. You saved us, said to her on the day the celebrations finally ended. You gave us hope when we had none. I gave you nothing, replied. I just reminded you of what you already had. The strength was always yours. I only helped you see it. She looked up at the sky, where the stars burned cold and bright. My ship is repaired, she said. Better than before, actually. Your engineers did good work. Felt a sudden fear. You are leaving. There are other systems out there, other conquered peoples, other empires that think they have won, turned to face her friend. I crossed the dead expanse once. I can do it again, and next time I will know the way. But you will be alone. Smiled. It was a real smile this time, warm and tired and genuine. Not for long, she said. Humans are curious. Eventually, more of us will find a way through, and when they do, I want there to be friends waiting on the other side. She embraced. Then she walked to her ship, climbed aboard, and sealed the hatch. The people of IV watched as the small, battered vessel rose into the sky. They watched as it climbed higher and higher, until it was just a bright point among the stars. They watched as that point began to move, heading toward the distant boundary of the dead expanse. Then it was gone. In the years that followed, the liberated peoples built a new civilization. They told stories to their children about the war and about the human who had arrived when all hope was lost. They told stories about a creature who was soft and fragile and weak, who should have died 100 times but refused, who crossed impossible space alone because she believed someone might need help. And sometimes, late at night, they would look up at the stars and wonder where she was now, what other battles she was fighting, what other impossible things she was making possible. The never returned to the system, but the legend of the human spread through their empire anyway, whispered in conquered worlds, passed from prisoner to prisoner, growing with each telling. The story of a species that did not know when to give up. The story of a woman who arrived after the war was lost and refused to believe it. Far across the galaxy, in the darkness between stars, a small ship flew on through the night. Was going to find another war. And when she found it, she was going to do what humans had always done. She was going to teach people how to win.